So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I sent them, following the pattern of the conference panels and the way that they had been organized, I sent them some questions ahead of time to think about, and I guess we can go through some of the questions and try to have a conversation about them, but I'm hoping also that maybe we can try to open it up a little bit and have them speak not only to the audience, but also to each other a little bit more informally to talk about some of these questions. So the first one is Ari Honrowar, and I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but okay, thank you. And she is an author of the Oracle Card set and book, Rumi's Gift, and the founder of Rumi with a View, a project dedicated to building music and poetry bridges across war-torn borders. Her writing has been featured on Teen Vogue, The Guardian, Vice, Huffington Post, and the Elephant Journal. This is a page of some of her articles that appear on the online journal, The Medium, where you can see some of her essays, and this is really the online journal where I was first introduced to her work. She currently facilitates a refugee women's drum circle in El Cajon, California, home to the largest population of Iraqi and Syrian refugees in the United States.
I'm the founder of Rumi with a View. And my background is kind of crazy. When I was 6, women of Iran lost their right to ride a bicycle or sing in public. And just as this war on women was beginning, Saddam attacked Iran and started an 8-year war that killed 1 million people and destroyed many more lives. During those dark days, it was the power of storytelling and poetry that really helped us survive. To give you an example, we used to go to the rooftops to watch the anti-missile aircraft shoot up into the air when we were very brave. And to my 6-year-old eyes, these patterns, beautiful patterns, would look like the most glorious 4th of July fireworks. But right underneath it, underneath the awe, there was terror. Was I going to be next? Was my sister in Tehran going to be bombed? My teacher, my friends, my best friend? And then at that moment, someone from a rooftop, probably my own mother, because she's a poet, would shout something like بر همگان گرز فلک زهر ببارد همه شب من شکرم در شکرم در شکرم در شکرم. Even if from the sky poison befalls all, I am still sweetness, wrapped in sweetness, wrapped in sweetness, wrapped in sweetness. And someone from down below, a passerby, would respond, دیگرانت عشق میخوانند و من سلطان عشق. ای تو بالاتر ز وهم این و آن بی من مرو. While others are singing about love, I am the Sultan of love. And verses like that would go right into your heart and radiate to every cell of your being until you were ecstatic as the 12th, 13th century poet Rumi. And what bomb could ever touch that? And my life was literally saved by a poem. Iran used to be an unofficial banned nation right after the war began, and people would not let Iranian refugees come to their countries. So there were just really drastic measures taken. people would go to Turkey and they would have to cross dressed as sheep with the sheep herders. Or someone would smuggle them out and say, hey, you need to run in a zigzag pattern so if they shoot you, you would have less of a chance to get shot. Now, my mother, instead of all of this, wrote a poem to the ambassador of, to the Indian embassy about India's Independence Day. And the ambassador really took a liking to it and granted us a visa to come to the US. Now my parents, the condition was that my parents had to go back. So I was 14 and I was by myself in America, which was this really crazy planet to me. I didn't speak English, I didn't have anything that I could say, this feels like home. So that kind of informs the background and I completely forgot my poetry as I was, just trying to integrate in this culture and become an American. So I, studied molecular biology, studied cancer research in graduate school, but then this tugging kept going at my heart, and my poetry kept coming back to me. So thus far, all the most popular Rumi translations are done by white men who don't speak Farsi. So I started translating Rumi the way I understood it best, and had my mother, who's a Persian literature scholar, help me get all the background to the very rich context that the poems were coming from. So that's how I started in the more creative path. But then the refugee crisis, the border crisis began, and there was talk of being, starting a Muslim registry and stuff like that. So I started writing op-ed pieces, and eventually became a journalist covering the border crisis. And I come across heartbreaking stories all the time at the border. And as Jody mentioned, I also work with refugees. He supported a travel ban, and I'm a refugee from a banned country. So obviously, we weren't exactly seeing eye to eye, but we actually really love each other. He's an older guy and he's alone, and he longs for that sense of community, which is no longer present. And he longs for what it was when even, there was a time he was living on a farm and he had to put water in his cereal because they didn't have milk. So he understands, hardship, but he had this sense of community. So he longs for that. And somehow, coming from my background where our communities shattered under political pressure, neighbors were betraying neighbors. My 16-year-old neighbor's girl was executed because she had political leanings. We actually don't know why she was executed because there was no trial. And when my father ran into the slain girl's dad, he asked what happened, why was she killed? And he just shook his head and said, I don't know, they never told us. So out of my sister's classroom, she was a sophomore, half of them were in jail. Half of these girls, teenage girls, were in jail for having a pamphlet or having their socks showing under their hijab or something, colored socks. This was this kind of a very tense situation where spies were everywhere and you couldn't trust anyone, even your own family. And when I saw a similar thing happening here, you know, where I'm like, well, is my neighbor going to turn me in as, you know, if a Muslim registry happens, you know, what will I do? Then I was like, no, we can't do this. We cannot go down that direction. And I hope that we get to talk about community a little bit more because that's so essential to our political discussion. But what I did was I asked my neighbor to help me deliver a piece of furniture to refugees. Now, I didn't tell them they were refugees. I just said, can you help me deliver a piece of furniture to a family in need? And he's a very kind-hearted person. So he said, of course. He had a bigger car, a teeny car. So when we went there, it was this really crazy scene. This woman came out. Her speech was affected by the trauma she had experienced in the war. She was little. She was not some like ISIS guy with a big beard and a machine gun, you know? Her little girl, who also didn't speak, was clinging to her leg. She was a little toddler and was just looking at us. Then, you know, so then my neighbor and I are trying to get this piece of furniture out, and this guy comes out. He's like, "Do you guys need any help?" And he was on crutches. One of his legs was missing, you know, because of the war. So his mind was blown to see this is what he was fighting against. I didn't have to say a thing. I just had to bring him to make his own conclusion. And afterwards, when we saw each other again, he was completely a different person. He actually said, "We've made a mess out of the Middle East." So it was very heartening for me to see that kind of a change. And I will not close my heart to anyone at any point because there's always chance for change. And talking about boundaries, that bridge should always be open to others who have different opinions or different experiences or backgrounds than us. And of course, there is a point where, you know, you're under attack, physical attack, and you have to just, you know, make your own decisions. But as far as dialogue, civilized situations, that always is there's always an avenue. I was having a chat with a filmmaker who won the Sundance Film Festival last year, 2 years ago. And she made this movie called Sonita. Has anyone seen it? Yeah, so it's a movie about an Afghan rapper, a teenage girl. She's a fierce rapper, and she's a refugee in Iran. And she ends up, her mother wants to sell her as a child bride. And so the movie is about the journey and how she navigates those really horrific obstacles. What the filmmaker was telling me was that people the Western media took this and made these horrific conclusions of the film, which was very disheartening to her because, and I can totally relate because Iran is a country of 81 million people. Afghanistan is a country of 36 million people. And if you have what I call a twittified response to everything that you see, you just kind of like have this simple conclusion, then it really creates more of a chasm. And it's not a simple thing to go ahead and cross, because what the conclusion most of the journalists had drawn was that, look how barbaric these countries are. And I'm patting myself on the back because I live in a country where women can rap. So that's just what we're hoping is for a nuanced response. understanding the history, understanding what happened with the Western intervention in the Middle East and what created the wave of fundamentalism, which some theorize is part of the reason that the U.S. had a coup in Iran and overthrew a democratic regime in 1953, and then installed a Shah dictator who was sympathetic to the U.S. and Great Britain at the time, what the backlash of it was that people never forgot. They had a really good thing going, and then when the issues happened with corruption and such, and a revolution was fermenting in Iran, people were like, we're not letting that happen again. So the hostage crisis happened, and then when the fundamentalists took over Iran, Afghanistan was like, here's a viable example where religious right can successfully run a country for a number of years. So the Taliban had a great example. And then we got the whole Osama bin Laden that was backed by the US, blah, 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 blah. So how do we get this situation, If we don't know the history, if we don't know the background, then we will never understand what has come out of this. It's akin to, saying that everyone is like Trump in America, all 300 million people are white supremacists, ignorant, or whatever. So those are the chasms that the audience, that I hope that I'll be able to cross with the audience to allow for more critical thinking. Now, I share the responsibilities, not just all, I'm not putting it all on the audience. So what I do in my fiction writing, I try to make the bad guy as empathetic as possible to get the audience think, okay, how did this person was created to be the person that he is? So that's part of the challenge that I think a lot of us as writers do face, writers of color. We don't want to be pigeonholed in one area. We want to have a broader, more intelligent, and more and an opportunity for more discussion to come out of